in the European media, it was in the international media. I had even like one panel similar to here, and there was on the audience a person from India, and he asked me, how did you do that you appeared on the Indian media? Yeah, how did you do it? So like what I just want to say, that it was very like, thanks. I know that it's a little bit perverse thinking, but like thanks to this big problem and how bad it was in Białowieża, we managed to raise the problem of the need to protect old growth forests very much in the profile in the public debate. And since then, we've seen a very big interest in protection of forests, old growth forests and forests in general in Poland. I should probably stop.
We will have more opportunity to dive deeper into that. But I would now like ask Gabriel to compare what was happening in Romania back then with what Agustin just reported about.
Also, good things and bad things. Should I start with the bad and finish with the good, maybe? Yeah.
Probably
so the
yes,
bad.
Yeah.
In some countries in Europe, we have this national forestry inventory using the very same methodology. Germany, Switzerland, Romania, they're using the same. And Romania was at the second cycle, which repeats every 4 or 5 years. And the numbers were out, and they were really worrying. Imagine we have a harvesting allowance in Romania of 18 million cubic meters, so 1/8 per year, legally. It doesn't mean sustainable. And on top of that, there was 20.6 million disappearing without a trace. We got a whistleblower from the scientific team who did this inventory. So this amount was missing out yearly from the forest. And we published it in a form of an open letter to the president of the country and to the ombudsman. And the president of the country said, first, I trust my government. They don't confirm this number. And the ombudsman is asking me for my investigation techniques and the source, so to give away the whistleblower. And 1 year later, thanks to public pressure, the president came out and he acknowledged the numbers and he said, the numbers are scary. We have to do something. That's the bad thing. The good thing is that at that time, 2018, 2019, it was the peak of the amount of hectares of old growth and primary forest, actually including virgin forest in climax state of development, to be strictly protected. It's not much, but we are proud to have more than 70,000 hectares of forests under strict protection in a national catalog, which is like untouchable. And another nice victory in that year was a fight that we have been carrying for like 20 years. I started with Greenpeace and then continued with the Asian Green. It's a fast road through the last intact forest landscape in the temperate climate latitude in Europe. The rest are just boreal forest in North Scandinavia, North Russia, but in the temperate climate, it's just that. And the victory, the final victory, was when some of those forests became part of the UNESCO World Heritage for beech forest. It was a very nice one. And we also learned that when you win something, it's not like forever. And it was a lesson learned that some new politician who had a lot of rest can come up and reopen the Pandora box, and you have to start again and find and always reinvent yourself. So the lesson learned was that you can never rest, and as long as you fight, you have a chance to win something. And that was some inspirational year altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And one more thing, may I do very quick?
Yeah.
Update of the last, on the mapping of the last primary and old growth forest came out, Primo Faro, which Matthias did a lot of work on it. And he added some degrees on his classes for doing so much work. And we found through that field and desk work that we were still having 8% of Romanian forest, not just native, but primary and old growth. That means over 500,000 hectares. And that's really, really great. And yes, let's say what happens, I will speak about when we come to the present, what happened with that inventory.
Maybe let's give it another couple of minutes. We have more people here on the panel who are from a country, or one person more who's from a country with lots of old growth forest left. I'm not talking of Germany. We almost have none of it, I would say virtually none. But Martin, you're Swedish. So how about primary forests conservation in Sweden?
First of all, we could question us if we have a lot left. I think we doesn't really have. I mean, it's a little bit a matter of definition. We have, of course, some very limited areas of really pristine forests, but we have also a larger area of natural stands that has had an impact from forestry earlier that keeps a good ecological quality today, more or less good at least. And those we are losing in a quite rapid phase at the moment. So it's a really negative trend we have at the moment. And I think the basic problem is that this is not unmanaged forests since a long time ago, but the management, the forestry has completely changed the last 60, 70 years. So even if they have been used for forestry before, with the methods applied today, it will be completely different, especially with the clear felling system, cutting, or like reducing the continuity of forests in reality. I think that is the biggest.
So that's ongoing.
Yeah, that's ongoing every day, and it's, I would say, it's not decreasing; it's rather increasing.
Okay. But Sweden is a part of the EU, and so there should be some Natura 2000 areas that prevent forests from being logged. I suppose. We have one expert in Natura 2000 here on the panel, that's Matthias. Maybe you cannot really judge from the Swedish perspective, but what is your experience? How much of a fortress is Natura 2000 for the conservation of outgrowth forests? So Augustine has already mentioned that it has not worked. Natura 2000 has not worked well, at least back
If I can make a
in 2018.
If I can make a clarification, only because we had Natura 2000 site there, it was possible to file complaint to the European Commission, and finally to have the verdict of the European Court of Justice. So it was the final safeguard that helped us to stop logging. It was impossible on the ground of the Polish law. So it was super important to have Natura 2000.
Thanks for explaining. Yeah, okay. Matthias.
Yeah, I would agree. If you have a good lawyer, Natura 2000 could be enforced. But if you don't have a lawyer, it looks very sad. Yeah, and
in Romania,
the situation. I would just like to talk about it. Looking back at 2018, there was the verdict of the Court of the Justice of the EU coming out in April 2018, and at the same time we worked on a complaint also in Romania together with Gabriel and other Natur and also Planet Earth. And we actually visited Warsaw to meet Agatha and some other lawyers from Planet Earth to think about how we can translate the Polish case into a case in Romania. So with the help of lawyers to make the same, and actually also to challenge the fact that in Romania, but not only, also in Austria, Sweden, there's massive logging also in all stands. And there is a systemic failure to implement Natura 2000 in all over forestry in Europe. It's not just in Romania and in Sweden and in Austria and in Poland. I think there are the same problems also in Germany. So this means that the whole forestry sector is forming kind of a fortress. Say we are sustainable per definition because all our laws say that forestry is sustainable. So we don't need that. Yeah, we are better than Natura 2000. And then they go to the old forest and log it down. So in Romania, we actually filed a complaint. This happened in 2019. The Commission reacted very quickly. So after a few months, there was the first letter sent to the Romanian government. In 2020, in February, there was an ultimatum for 1 month, I think, given to the Romanian government to respond. They failed. So there was the recent opinion. The second stage was launched in the summer 2020. But since then, nothing happened. But this is for the next question then.
A lot happened.
But on the side of the European Commission, there was no progress because the Commission said if Romania doesn't comply, then they need to escalate to the Court of Justice of the EU, like it happened in Poland and in Slovakia and also in Sweden. But in Romania and also in Austria, this did not happen because of political reasons, most likely. But this is a bit difficult to understand what's happening behind the curtains. So, and the second thing happened in 2018. It was a very hot year. There were droughts, forest fires, bark beetle infestations all over Central Europe, massive collapse of spruce plantations in Germany, in Austria. So actually it showed that this is not sustainable. Yeah, what was the, let's say, the focus, the majority of the forestry management, let's say, activities in the past 100-200 years, meaning mainly to focus on spruce plantations, did not work. And because of the climate heating, it actually leads to collapse of huge areas. Also in Austria, thousands of hectares collapsed in 2018 and the years afterwards. And this also made clear that we need to talk about ecosystem functions as well, not just about some Natura 2000 species, but still Natura 2000 gives you at least the opportunity to go for lawsuits and to enforce that. But in general, there was a third thing which was coming up in 2018. It was the Green Deal and the biodiversity strategy and the forestry strategy, because in 2018 there was actually the discussion about that. It was,
we can leave that to Thomas.
What they published in the year afterwards. And I think it was also clear that the state of the forests in Europe is not in a good shape. And we need to protect the old stands, and we need to change the management of the production forest.
We'll come back to that, to this idea that we need two strategies, actually, one for conservation of old growth and one for the improvement of managed forest. We will come to that later on. But now this moment to turn to Thomas Waitz. So Thomas, how did the political framework look like some years ago, like around 2018? We don't have to stick to exactly that year. And what has happened ever since? So I think there's been lots of innovations on the political scene, haven't there?
Well, I try to build on what colleagues have mentioned already. 2018 was the time when the climate movement was super active, when actually the climate movement was able to streamline the question of climate protection and the urgency, but not only, also the question of biodiversity and the loss of species, the dramatic loss of species, to kind of mainstream that message into the whole society, basically forcing all political parties to come up with some kind of programs. Some of them were substantial, others were just made for election campaigns, but still they all needed to come up with answers with what they would propose. And also based on the Bielorusia case, I would say it was a successful move, basically by civil society, to transfer the attention also from Bielorusia to the Romanian forests. I think it partly worked. Well, I mean, then we went into elections. Elections brought quite a strong result for the Greens, but it's not only about the result of the Greens, but basically also conservatives in the person of Ursula von der Leyen realized that she has to come up with a concrete proposal now how to tackle biodiversity loss and climate change, and she did with bringing a Green Deal and the Green Deal, but the Green Deal was brought to us by the climate movement and by civil society campaigning well on the issues and raising a lot of attention for these topics. Okay, I mean, I respect Ursula von der Leyen for coming up with a proposal. In this Green Deal, and sometimes I think we should recall, I mean, 2018, no one of us hoped to see a relatively ambitious Green Deal being put forward by a conservative commission president. So things have improved, even though a lot of the announcements that we've seen at the beginning have not proven to be transformed into policies, into concrete legislation. I mean, we had a biodiversity strategy. The main question on common agriculture policy was not touched. A forest law was foreseen. I'll come back to that later. The nature restoration law was foreseen. I mean, we're today in the very happy situation that at least we pushed it through the council. But see, it took us until 2024 to actually reach an agreement with Parliament and the Council now, and it's still not in place, this legislation. So there's a lot of resistance against that. More and more attention was raised on the question of participation of forests into CO2 sequestration. More and more also politicians understood that without agriculture, but that's not the topic of today, and forestry, we will not be able to reach climate neutrality. So the question of what kind of forestry and what kind of forests are actually binding CO2 into the soil. And there we came back to the question of old growth and pristine forests, and their eco services and climate services they are actually delivering to society. And so back to the question why it's so important to protect them. When it came to infringement procedures, I must say this was a bit of a disappointing part of this term, because in the case of Romania, I think starting a court case should have been evident, and unfortunately the start of the war in Ukraine has troubled us on many fronts. This is one of them. Infringement procedures, and this is my personal assessment, against Romania were not started because of geostrategical needs to keep the country in the Western alliance, yeah, which is tough to say, but unfortunately that's my assessment. What we saw is that in the first part of the legislature, Green Deal legislation went well. Let's say at least the parts where some part of industry had a vital interest and saw some opportunities to earn some money in the future. Where it got really difficult is in the moment where we talked about nature protection, so forest protection, protection of moors and so on, where it was not clear what part of industry would actually profit from that. It would have only been the public and the nature profiting, and this didn't seem to be enough to really build substantial majorities. The plan on delivering a forest law, something that we urgently need. I mean, we need protection of pristine forests on one hand. I would say, first of all, we should look into state-owned forests, but we also need a complete change in forestry strategy across the European Union. Otherwise, we will not be able to maintain forestry in changing climates. We need forests that are able to adopt, and many more arguments why we have to see a change in strategy. Well, the forest law was taken off the agenda thanks to the pressure of industry, thanks to the pressure that EPP, so the European People's Party, has been given in and then turned against their own Commission president, watering down the approach towards a forest law, changing it to a forest monitoring law. I was making the cynical statement that we could use Google Maps actually, because it tells you everything about the state of a forest. We don't need an extra law for that, yeah. But also a lot of resistance then coming from the Nordic countries, which was strategically problematic because the Commission needed the Nordic countries to approve other climate laws, like the climate law, like pricing CO2, so taking like measurements towards circular economy, right to repair, and all of this. So there was a need to keep the Nordics in the majority, so they were given a lot in return, basically taking ambitious forest protection off the agenda, and that's highly problematic for where we're reaching now and what we're doing now. Let's see how the future looks like, but this is a second round, and I would say this is just a very quick assessment. Maybe a point that I will raise later is the deforestation-free value chains, which is a very interesting one, which we pushed through. And I would say without European industry realizing that this also applies to them. Because in the moment they realized the law was perfectly decided and there's no way back. But in the moment they realized, they started awkward campaigns. But let's talk about that maybe in the second round.
I think they're just realizing right now what new problems they're getting into. So thanks a lot, Thomas. I think a really useful overview of political innovations and also failures, which we can also use for the conclusions, the lessons learned that we should talk about at the end of the first hour here. Thomas, you have mentioned that it's kind of a parallel exercise or parallel goal also to improve the management of managed forests, like to improve the to make management of forests biodiversity friendly. And Martin, this is more or less at the core of your job, as I understand. Thomas, you are a forester yourself and probably well connected to other small scale farmers. How many hectares do you have, if I may ask?
Approximately 40.
40, yeah. So this is not so small, but not large scale yet, I would say. So Martin, what are you doing actually?
I've been working as an advisor for private forest owners the last 15 years, and I have focused on the private forest owners from the beginning, as I think the standard forestry model is really suitable for paper and pulp industry. And I think
in Sweden.
Yeah, in Sweden. Yeah, this is really with a Swedish perspective. So I think approximately 25% of the forest land in Sweden is owned by the industry. And I think they have no really reason to change their forestry because they own the paper mill. But it's completely different for the other 50% that is privately owned by physical persons because they doesn't own the industry. So their business ends when the timber leave the forest. The other companies, they're doing the profit in the factories. So that's why I think it's easier to have a discussion about is the forestry suitable for them. And I would say the standard model is not suitable for the forest owner. It leads us to produce a lot of pulpwood, and it has half the value of timber for the sawmill instead. Only there is the first step. And the next thing is that an ecological risk is an economical risk for the forest owner in a much different way.
A non-company private forest owner.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Compared to the industrial perspective. I mean, the time perspectives are completely different.
So
I feel I want to jump in because when I hear forest owner, it hurts my feelings somehow. I don't believe in ownership. I think ownership gives you too many rights. I believe in being a forest guardian. I'm a guardian of 400 hectares of forests as well. And owning forest, I don't think is a privilege, is a duty. So if we change this, if we shift this from forest ownership to guardian, it shifts from power position into responsibility. I'll be gone in a few decades, but that forest will be there. And I made sure through the papers and it will never be touched. 250 hectares under strict protection, 150 similar to what you're trying and other people in Germany and other countries are trying, forestry close to nature. And the goal is in the end, that's a bit conspiring too much from the future. I want to see on every single piece of furniture, something that doesn't exist right now. And I'm asking the industry since decades and they refused. And it took me decades to understand why they refused. I want to see modern technology like a QR code on the back of the seat that will take me exactly through Google or whatever, where that piece of furniture is coming from. And I realize the industry doesn't want that because it will lead you to a clear cut, most likely. And with forestry close to nature, it can lead you to a closed canopy. This is possible. And I think there is a lot of questions around here. There's no time to answer them now, but do it in the right way. And perhaps we should join forces.
Yeah, I think you're making a really good point there.
Yes.
So to bring the consumer much closer to the production. I think that is one key problem we have today.
Part of it, not just closer, part of it.
Yeah,
Let the consumer be part of it because he's paying the money and he has the guarantee. He took a piece of furniture like a chair or a table that will exist for at least the lifespan of a tree. And if an oak is living for half a millennium, then that chair should store carbon and beauty for half a millennium at least.
So we also have to talk about company-owned forests. You have some experience also from Romania, as I understand.
A lot.
But later. First, Thomas, please, and then Matthias in this topic. I understand, Thomas, that you're also interested in the standards for forestry in managed forests.
I mean, first of all, I mean the strictly nature protected forests are the safeguards of the maximum possible biodiversity. So they have their role on their own. But beyond that, close to nature forestry means different species, different age, natural regrowth, selective harvesting, basically. And you can apply these principles on every forest, all the way from coastal forests from Portugal all the way up to permafrost close to, yeah. This is a method where you can you have a very high biodiversity service, you have a very high service of storing water, you have very resilient forests in terms of climate impacts, storms, heavy rains, pests, and so on. And you have also the possibility to harvest quite substantial amounts of wood. Why does this economically not perform so well? Because the harvesting is much more expensive than if you just clear cut with a harvester. And it needs certification to make that visible to consumers. And FSC or these kind of things, they promised this kind of certain ecological standard, but unfortunately there's so many cases of fraud and mislabeling that they have lost trust, and rightly so, even though some projects are quite okay. So we need a certification for that very clearly, and that's one of the key questions. Also here in the parliament, because I mean, if you talk about nature protection, you don't automatically find a majority here. But if you talk about fair market access and transparency for consumers, so they can make an informed choice, this is a language, you know, other members here start to understand. And so this is one of the main, I think, goals for this mandate, also to get a certification in place here.
Okay, so okay, we are already looking to towards 2030 here, almost at least. Matthias.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Carmen. I think what we are facing right now is kind of a clash of different paradigms in the forest sector. We have got the conservation perspective, because in Europe there's almost no forest left, which is more or less
managed,
undisturbed by man. Yeah. Then we have the close to nature forest management, which is a small niche at the moment. And then we have the commercial production forest management, which is mainly oriented in maximizing profits from timber extraction and sales of timber. Yeah, so let's call it industrial forestry. And what we need is a shift from these industrial practices from the only focus on timber extraction, on wood extraction, to a focus where we understand the ecosystems and the need of the ecosystems, because forests do not only provide wood for the owners of the forest, they also provide us with water storage, water purification, soil protection, oxygen production, landscape cooling. Yeah, if you have a forested land, it does not heat up so much, because the forest will create actually cloud cover and thunderstorms in the afternoons, and then you have shadow and more rain. It stores carbon, it absorbs and stores carbon, which is extremely important in terms of climate heating. Yeah, but for that part of the functions of the services of the forest, there is no economy. So nobody pays a forest owner for providing all this stuff to society. And this is something we have to change, because then immediately it will become understandable that forest is not just about wood, but it's about a lot of services. And also the forest sector, they speak often about the multifunctionality of their forests, but actually there's a lot of blah, blah. And mainly they mean, leave us alone with our trees. Yeah, and don't interfere. Yeah, don't torture us with nature conservation or whatever, because we are the better conservationists at all. And there's an ideological clash, which is sad, because society needs forest. So therefore, we need to have a dialogue also with the forestry sector in the perspective to ensure that the ecosystem functions of the forest will be improved, because otherwise we will have serious problems. If we lose forest cover in Europe, we will lose water. This will accelerate the climate heating, and we will lose all kinds of fundaments for society and also for economy. So this will strike back heavily. And I think that's the discussion we need now. And therefore also we need, this is my last point, we need to counter all these lies, misleading narratives which are around. And there's a lot of false information around about forests and their ecology and their functions. And that's something we need to counter. society is badly informed about the value of the forests and about the best solutions. And I think this is something where we need to work together. Also, a civil society organization also to work together with science. Yeah, we need to rebut that.
Okay. So pick it up, please, quickly for the conclusions, because this is now reaching out to the audience who has traveled here from all parts of Europe. So because I think people will be happy to know how they can get involved. Augustine,
I just wanted to refer to one topic of certification. I must say that I'm not a very big believer in certification, because I come from a country where 80% of the forests are public, state-owned, most of them. And when it was not comfortable anymore for the state forest, our Polish state forest, to be certified, they started to resign massively from FSC certification, which currently is considered to be the most solid one. This happened in Białowieża when there were problems. This happened in the Carpathians when the problems started. So in my opinion, we shouldn't rely on non-obligatory schemes like certification. We should have strong safeguards in the law, and it should be national law, to really protect the forest from and to be able to enforce the protection regime.
This is about strict protection, correct?
This is about the certification of close to nature forestry. This is my opinion. I know that there are people who believe in certification, but in our specific case in Poland, this was not.
Certification can be a strategy to achieve legal binding. So it's you have to start somewhere.
I'm just saying that in my opinion, the end, if you want to have really enforceable regulations, it shouldn't be non-obligatory certification.
You need good laws.
I think, yeah, you need laws, you need certification, but I'm also skeptical to the idea of certification, because you put the task to someone else to guarantee that your consumption is okay. And I think that is a problem. Your idea of connecting it is much better. But I think, and anyway, I'm working for an organization working on a new certification, but I think the most important thing we have to do is to offer, I would say, the society a new community for forestry. Like today, the industry is quite dominant, and they offer, especially like the private forest owners and others, some kind of community to hang out with and be a part of. And I think there we need to offer something new to give another picture of what is a forest and what is forest management.
A real forest.
Yeah. Just a little story. No.
Before we come to the story,
Very connected from this. You're not
I
sure.
think we're running. Time is running. Okay, maybe we can have it in the discussion if there are some questions that might refer to that. I'm looking, trying to manage time, so sorry for that. A quick, taking distance now. We have talked about successes and failures. So let's do a simple exercise now. Ask yourself, what is the trend of deforestation, or the trend of conservation of old growth forests in your countries? Yeah, Poland, Austria, Sweden, Romania. I don't know if Thomas wants to participate or has to keep neutral. I don't know. And then thumbs up if you think that the conservation status is improving of old growth forests in your country. Thumbs down if you think it's going down, it's deteriorating.
Right now.
And you can also use both thumbs if you think that there are like divergent trends. I will participate. Okay, thank you. That was negative and moderately negative to one positive trend, actually, which is interesting to see. Maybe we make use of this. What do you think? Why is it? Does it have to do with the events around Białowieża, that now conservation of old growth forest in Poland is in an upward trend?
Definitely. You know, like in campaigning, sometimes we say the worse it is, the better it is, because the worse the case is, the easier later it is to use it
Yeah.
as an emblematic case and increase the protection. Either it's a forest, any other type of campaign. So the situation was so bad in Białowieża, it attracted so much international and domestic attention, and there was such a big outrage. So many people came to Białowieża and took part in direct actions. There were blockades there. We counted it. I was there. There were 4,000 people that got involved in this case. That the public support for forest conservation in Poland increased very much. Now we have public opinion polls that we've been like commissioning for years already, for a couple of years, and they are very consistent. 75% of the Polish society wants to reduce the area where the trees are logged, and most of the society supports the idea of protect at least 20% of the public forest. And this is what is happening because it was so bad, and also the situation with logging was very politicized. It was very much associated with one political party that was taking decisions in 2017 that in the recent election debate and election campaign, the major opposition parties went to the elections with very strong pro-environmental and pro-conservation, forest conservation programs. And this is currently happening in Poland. Yeah, like somehow the society forced the politicians to speak about it, and a program of excluding 20% of public forests from logging has started. For sure, we would like it to be more ambitious. For sure, we would like it to be faster. But one of the things that we actually agree with the state forests and with people that are pulling into a little bit opposite direction, maybe more extraction, is that the old growth forests should be the first ones that are included in this 20%. Here we agree. Actually, there is a consensus here. And just want to say about Białowieża, I spoke that like in 2018, this large-scale logging was stopped because of the verdict of the Court of Justice of the European Union. Since then, we haven't had chainsaws almost in Białowieża forest on very small scale, maybe in some logging to assure public safety, maybe sometimes a little bit too much, but there was no large-scale logging because also of some legal procedures. And maybe I will not get into details, it's too detailed, but the important thing is that Białowieża forest, Carpathians, many other forests with characteristics of old growth forests or strictly old growth forests are protected in Poland, and the trend is increasing. More forests we expect will be non-intervention.
We have the opposite in Romania.
Massive logging also in other Natura 2000 sites before the new government went in.
Yes, in Carpathians we saw maybe not clear cuts, but also quite high intensity logging, and it was increasing during the last 10 years. This in 10 most important forest complexes identified by experts in cooperation with the Ministry of Climate. The logging stopped on the 8th of January, another day that I will remember until the end of my life of this year.
I would like to hear more from Thomas about what's happening or has happened recently on the political scene, like elections, meaning of elections, and also natural restoration law, of course. But just give Gabriel 1 minute because he wanted to add on the recent topic here.
Yeah, because we have an opposite situation in Romania than in Poland, but we should have had the same as a result of the infringement. That the very fact, and I endorse the scenario expressed by Thomas Waitz, that the geopolitical situation in Romania at the start of the war in Ukraine reversed the trend in a very negative way, with Romania going like forever in this infringement and not being closed by a case to European Court of Justice or legal change in Romania. This is bad. What we have in Romania since the moment I said in the beginning that we presented the results of that Primo Faro primary and old growth forest with 500,000 hectares, I presented that mapping first, not to the authorities, but to the corporations logging all of Romania. IKEA, Schweighofer, Kronospan, Lausanne, Ildiz Integre, Kastamonu, the Turkish, all the big ones. And it was the very representative of IKEA who stood up in this gentleman dinner, because we were having a gentleman discussion to reach a gentleman agreement, he stood up and he punched the table and he said to everyone, no, these are the last forests we can cut. And strict protection is a stupid thing, is a waste. And that hurt a lot. And since then, up to today, and right as we speak, there is an ecstasy of destruction of the logging corporations that are destroying plot by plot every single remaining primary forest because they can and because they're FSC certified. So FSC is so bad, not just in implementation, but in standard. It allows a clear cut in a virgin forest inside the national park. So that's as bad as it is. And they are doing forest roads where they never existed. There was a reason why this 8% was untouched, because there was no technology, and also because Romania embraced in the 19th century forestry close to nature, like the French model in the 19th century. And now we are doing the worst possible when Europe is trying to correct. We're embracing the Swedish Scandinavian forestry model, which is a disaster. It is a disaster. I'm sorry.
I fully agree.
I fully agree. Yeah.
And I would say we have more or less exactly the same development in Sweden today. I mean, of course, we protect some old growth forest. It's a slow increment, but we lose much more. And yeah.
A lot to say about that, I'm sure, still, but I had already activated Thomas, asking him about the recent developments on the European level. So, Thomas, what is your take on what do the elections, the recent elections, mean actually for what we have to expect for the next years in?
That's not the easiest question, because all these negotiations are currently going on here in the European Parliament, and it's basically the European People's Party that will be the decisive ones, whether joining forces with far-right forces, which could mean a definite end of any future Green Deal legislation, even a drawback on some of the existing ones, or if they decide to stick to a pro-European majority around the center, including the Greens. This is currently the negotiations going on. And this is exactly what is at stake. At stake is the Green Deal, the follow-up and the still missing files, but also already existing legislation, because a new commission can come up simply with the proposal to review every single law that we've been deciding on. So that's really part of what we're struggling to ensure in the moment. I would like to reflect on some things that have been said. I basically share Augustine's view absolutely. A responsible political choice would be to enforce close to nature forestry on every single forest in the European Union. It would be wise, it would be smart, it would be sustainable, also economically sustainable in times of climate change. The political reality is that we're far from this. You've seen the nature restoration law. This is a very actual topic. Originally, it has proposed 30% of also forest landscapes to be brought back to a close to nature status. In negotiations, we went all the way down to 20%, and even these 20% were still enough of a burden for some to try to even stop this kind of nature restoration law. So that's my reality, and that's why I also think, and that's linked to the second point, why certification can make sense compared to organic, because it allows also consumers to have a certain guarantee for quality, and it allows also forest guards following Gabi here, forest guards who need to live and feed a family from this to also capitalize on the extra advantages they take or extra work they have. And then, I mean, what is politically to me highly interesting is all the question around the deforestation-free value chains, so due diligence, because that's really shaking the scene. since I give you an example, since our Austrian wood processors have realized that this is not only applying for imports from somewhere else or from Amazon or Indonesia, but this is also applying to inner European production. And this will lead to a certain actually transparency on origin, which means Austrian companies cannot hide the wood that they're importing from Russia, from Belarus, from Romania, as they did earlier. You know, they cannot hide where they get all the logs from, and they started a really awkward fake news campaign carried all through every media you can imagine that is conservative and close to farmers, spreading fake news like every farmer has to give GPS data for every single stem and has to put numbers on every single stem, and it's going to be a monster of bureaucracy and you name it, which is completely wrong. But industry is now going crazy on the deforestation-free value chains, and I expect that there will be initiatives to actually reverse that legislation. And I think that's something we have to be very aware of, because the transparency and the obligation to transparency is I would say the perfect tool in our hands to put light on wrongdoings, on illegal logging, on origins that are in old growth forests and so on. So that's I think we should really focus on. And the second thing I want to mention, and this is basically for private owners. You have parts of the forestry sector, at least in my country and also in Slovenia, as an example, where the whole country is close to nature forestry. You have foresters that have been doing the right thing since 100, 200 years, and that are running close to nature forests, which contain elements of old growth or primeval forests. So they have dead wood, they have extremely old individuals, but they are there on purpose because there's foresters that take responsibility and do it right. And we have to be aware that through our protection calls, that is also, let's say, creating a lot of reverse counter pushes also from the sector of forest owners that are doing close to nature forestry. I mean, we have to be careful that we don't punish the ones by kind of threatening them with total protection, punish the ones that did it right and do it right, while the ones that have put their strategy on monocultures and spruce and whatever and clear cuts get away and can keep on running their business on their forest. So we have to be aware of that. If it's state forest, it's perfectly fine. If it's privately owned forest, we need to think about contract-based nature protection and that kind of schemes.
Yeah. Thank you, Thomas. I think it really adds a lot of value to listen to your European perspective. This complexities that you have just mentioned is really important to listen to. You have to leave in 2 minutes, I think. Is that correct?
Don't kick him out.
5, 6, 7 minutes, yeah. 5, 6, 7 minutes, okay.
Okay, yeah, maybe a little bit more, then we listen to Matthias, and then we come to the conclusions.
Okay, I will be very brief. Thank you, Thomas. This is a very important point because in discussions often there is a contradiction made between strict protection and close to nature management of forests. But in reality, it should be an integrated model. So you should keep the old stands. It's be possible untouched so that the forest can exploit the full ecological potential. And in between also do selection of woods in order to make a living. It should not be a contradiction, but it should be an integrated model where you have a forest landscape with these different elements. Where you have large stands of old growth forest, they should be protected on a bigger bunch. Yeah, because then the expression of ecological processes is much better because all the species can also migrate, the ecological integrity is higher, but it's not a contradiction. And I think this is often in discussion. So either strict protection and then the forest owners are losing their property or whatever, or kind of we have to manage everything. It's not about that. And I just wanted to add one more thing about EUDR, this European Deforestation Regulation. There has been a regulation before, which is in force already. It's called the EUTR, the European Timber Regulation. And that's obligatory for all the forest owners in Europe. So they should have geolocated their forests already. So they should be in the register already, yeah, since this European legislation entered force more than 10 years ago, but rarely anyone did that. And now they're waking up and say, shit, I need to put in my geolocation in a register on an EU platform, because this was not enforced. Natura 2000 is also not enforced. We haven't had any appropriate assessment, nature impact check before forest management in some of the provinces in Austria at all since this entered force in 1998. We were complete ignorance. So this law enforcement thing is crucial. And when we come back to the EUDR, now enforcement is coming, and that's why they are screaming.
So wide awake. Thank you. Really interesting. I bet the small minority of German forest owners actually have geolocated their forest. Okay, thank you. We promised to have 30 minutes for interaction with the audience, but before we need some conclusions. And Thomas, I would like to invite you to be the first to draw very brief conclusions from the discussions that we had today here. And I would like you to address 3 points. First one, what has worked and what should we follow up in the next 6 years? Then second, what has not worked and should be dropped? And third, what promising new pathways do you see? So any new tools that you suggest? And I'm sure many of them have already you have already mentioned, but now there's the opportunity to boil it down to 3 points.
Okay, I'll try. I mean, what has worked is in the moment where civil society organizations between them and different political forces and partly even state institutions have started to combine forces to highlight certain awkward cases. That has worked. And so this cooperation between, let's say, reasonable political forces, which are fortunately not only Greens, we also find some reasonable members in other parties. We have to be open also to include others, even though they might just be halfway towards the good. But so these alliances that has worked, and I think it's also something we have to follow up on. What has not worked is trying to what has worked is putting pressure on companies. What has not worked is trusting their promises of freely and freelancingly taking care that certain standards are respected. So that is not working, because that works for a year or 1.5 as long as there's public attention, and then they return to the same destructive strategy. So I wouldn't focus too much on that. WWF is doing a lot of that stuff. I don't think it works. I think they should also stop it. Certification schemes, that's something we need to keep on attacking. The ones that we have, FSC is I mean, it's a cheat, it's and we have to talk about that. New tools, I see that there's quite a big debate going on about the question of sustainability of supply. We have these debates in agriculture, but we also have these debates in forestry. So there's this economical argument coming on top in relation to climate and in relation to biodiversity loss. I think Matthias said that, or Gabi, it's also an economical threat, or our Swedish colleague, it's an economical threat. I mean, if your spruce plantations collapse for a farmer or for a forester, I mean, that's a big loss also. And meanwhile, we know that certain monocultures will not be able to survive the next 100 years. And so this economical argument that allows us to get more allies on a maybe not so expected side. I mean, securing a sustainable also stream of raw material from forests in combination with biodiversity protection, landscape protection. Matthias mentioned many more eco-services. I think that's something that I see a certain chance that we can reach majorities also adding these arguments. But last but not least, I mean, what we need to watch out, and this is what we're struggling to do here today, is to prevent any backtracking on the existing Green Deal legislation. We all know it's not perfect. We all know it's not reaching far enough, and we have to fight it further. But unfortunately, in this moment, we need to safeguard what we have, and in case attacked, we need to be strong on counter narratives.
Super. Thank you, Thomas. Also, well, really fingers crossed that the next years will be equally good for EU policy on old-growth forests and primary forests, under more difficult conditions, though. So good luck, and yeah.
I'm used to difficult conditions, as all my colleagues here are, and we keep on fighting. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a pleasure seeing you guys.
We won't give in.
Thank you.
You are invited to stay with us here, but you told us that you
I have to run, unfortunately. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks so much. Okay. Time has advanced, but no hectic, but brief 1, 2, 3 points. What has worked? What has not worked? New ideas. Gabriel.
What has worked, I think, in the first lockdown, we had released a European biodiversity strategy by the Commission. It was very hope-giving. And we immediately took that out on the agenda in Romania. And we put it on the table of the Prime Minister and the Environmental Ministry. And even if it's not a legal binding for every member state, we managed to trigger a series of debates. And we are today, 4 years later, on the stage that we will have public debates in the next few weeks in Romania about this 10% strict protection. So Romania is quite advanced because it was that positive trend at that time. I don't know if there is any country in Europe which has that already, the 10% mapped and ready for public debates. But this is really, really great. It worked. And I think it's a job for Thomas, if he's still here. No, he's not. And others like him, to make sure that this European biodiversity strategy will become legal binding for every single member state. What didn't work is the infringement. We put all our hope and energy, and we went close to bankruptcy to serve European Commission with the litigations and the field work that they wanted. And what happened in these years of infringement, I just give you 2 full years, 2021, 2022, 13 million cubic meters of wood came out of Natura 2000 sites without adequate assessment. So breaking the European Habitat and Species Directive, 30 million cubic meters is a queue of trucks fully loaded with wood from Romania to China. So I lost trust in the Commission, and they will have to work very, very hard that we gain the trust again in them. So Commission is a very disappointing institution right now for me.
Different than the Court of Justice, I understand. Thank you, Gabi. Martin,
Yeah.
doesn't have to be the 3 points, but what would you emphasize? Most important tools that we should try to make best use of in the next years?
I think, I mean, it's the implementation of close to nature forestry that is my sector, so to say. And I think a positive development is that we, at least with a Swedish or Scandinavian perspective, we have a discussion about at least continuous cover forestry. And that's, I would say, a step ahead, but it's really not enough. I mean, it's you could have a intensive plantation that's still continuous cover. So what we are lacking is a discussion about, I would say, ecological framework surrounding the forestry to tell us what could we allow us to do, what could we not be allowed to do to maintain a functional, ecological functional forest, and based on that, develop the forestry. What I also think is important to remember is that to have a discussion, have a nice brochures and instructions for what you should do, that is the first step. But I'm sometimes a little bit afraid that maybe we'll just end up with that. When I came into forestry around 95 or something.
Neat science, but no policy.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to 95, we have a discussion about like general activities for some nature protection connected to forestry activities in Sweden. And it was quite a good initiative. It produced a lot of good instructions, but after a few years, like 10 years later, it like diminished and was not really implemented. So I think there's also a risk that we, so to say, we have a conclusion, we are satisfied, and doesn't really do the follow-up. That is maybe what I see.
That's what we need strong civil society for, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Martin. I think in order to have at least some good time, some good moments for the audience, please, Matthias.
Very briefly, yeah, talking about Austria. The biodiversity strategy has two elements which are completely key. The one is the protection, the mapping and protection of all the remaining old growth and primary forests in Europe. That's absolutely key. That's something we have to do. And the other element is that we have to make a shift to a more closer nature forest management in the production forest. When talking about the third thing in Austria, we have no idea what the nature forests are in Austria. There is no inventory, there's no mapping. There have been attempts to do mapping, but strong resistance of the forest owners because they don't want to allow anybody to look into their wallet. So therefore, there is no public scheme. There's some knowledge in the provinces. In Austria, it's the problem that the provinces are in charge of nature conservation, which means that we have a fragmented, completely weird system of protection here and no protection there. It's a big chaos. So this needs to be organized and cleaned. Yeah, we need to do this inventory and we need to take it serious. Austrian provinces said there is no money for the conservation of the old growth forests, and it's not obligatory, so we don't make it. We don't follow. This is just voluntary. Yeah? And that's morally a disaster. We're facing a planetary biodiversity crisis. Yeah. So this is completely unacceptable that the provinces of a formerly progressive country like Austria come up with such a statement. That's unacceptable. Completely. Yeah. So we need to do the mapping. We need to do enforcement of Natura 2000 because we have some legal leverage there to do that. And my friends are working on that. We started some lawsuits in Austria, which actually makes some people nervous now. And they think about they probably maybe change something into better compliance. Otherwise, they risk more lawsuits coming up. So we need lawyers, we need budgets, and we need budgets also for the forest owners, because many of them say, yeah, I have to follow all this Natura 2000 stuff, and it's so, and this means that I cannot take wood out of the forest as much as possible, blah, blah, blah. So now, who pays me for that? So we need budgets. And if we shift into this, let's say, rewarding of ecosystem function provision by landowners, there needs to be kind of an economic alternative. This could happen through also private investments into some forest reserves. There's this voluntary CO2 compensation thing where there's a lot of discussion to what extent companies, municipalities could also put money into conservation of natural forests. Yeah, but we need also public budgets. It's a joke what Austria has in the budget for nature conservation, completely ridiculous. And we need to make progress here. And the discussion yesterday where the Austrian minister, hero, Leonore, she risks a lawsuit in Austria because the conservatives, they're completely crazy now. They threaten her with all kinds of lawsuits, etc. She's a hero, and she actually made a strong statement that this, let's say, this cloud of threats, of aggression, of ideology, radicalized ideology, and also misinformation, that this layer, this cloud, we have to move it away. We have to clear the sky and just, be brave.
Go back to facts and also rules.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And science.
And
Of course, because it's like
science,
it's mostly parallel with politics and
science-based
society.
policy. Yeah.
Last
but not least, Augustine.
I will be very brief. What really for sure worked in Poland was mobilization of the society to oppose destruction of the most precious forest. Raising the profile of forest protection in Poland. This is something that really worked. What did not work was the fact that it even happened, that this logging was not stopped the next day after it started, but it took 8 months to stop it. And another thing that I think worked was like coming with a vision of protecting forests in general in Poland, including old growth forests. But I think what we lacked and what we should do more in the future is looking at it more holistically, communicating to all the stakeholders, speaking not only with conservationists, but also with the foresters, with wood processing industry, with all the people that will be affected by an inevitable reform that will have to happen. So we have to talk with them, and we have to think of solutions that will make it possible without harming people. What Matthias said, we have to think about what people will live from. We'll have to think how to reduce the demand for wood to be able to create protected areas and still have the wood. So what I think for the future, we have to focus more on is not only say we need 10% of the forests or 20% of the forest strictly protected, but we need to think how to do it for it to be possible without socio-economic harm for all the stakeholders. Yeah, I could speak a lot about it, like burning wood, like using it for single-use paper, all these wasteful uses of wood that we have all the time. Okay, stop. I know that I should have been more.
Yeah, it's 60 minutes are of course too short to cover it all. But I hope this has been inspiring up to this point, so that you might have questions or comments to the discussions, or any new points that you would like to bring up. Vegef is the first, and then the gentleman in the second row. Maybe you introduce yourself briefly.
Oh, I was not going to say that. One thing that is still sort of missing here, I think that the climate law, the LULUCF demand for more carbon in the ecosystems. And I don't have an overview of what it looks in European countries, but it's the Nordic countries. The only way that this can happen is to reduce the harvest level. And if you want to be optimistic, it sounds to me like there's a window of opportunity connected to that. So it might be interesting to hear some comment on that from you.
I can just say that in Poland, it's the same story. If we don't reduce the logging intensity, we will not meet our goals in the LULUCF regulation. Although, unfortunately, there is another narrative and discourse pushed by people who want extraction, saying that actually we have to log old growth forests because then we will be able to fix more carbon because the young forests are growing faster. And it is very hard to counter this narrative because it is being promoted by professional foresters. And so, yeah, the same story in Poland. We have to reduce logging, but it is very difficult to push through this narrative.
Gabi?
I think it was not directly mentioned, but somehow through promoting forestry close to nature on vast areas, it speaks by itself. But perhaps we could, I don't know much about this. Is a directive or regulation coming? It's a regulation that will come. This is good. This is going to be directly enforceable, but it will be again in pretty much in the power of the civil society, considering the current political context to make it happen, actually. And I suggest one common slogan that would work everywhere: let the trees grow.
Yeah,
simple. We need really simple slogans, and I think we can be once again united in a thing like let the trees grow. It's so simple. Let them grow.
The soil accumulates.
That's the narrative of pro-forestation. Yeah. So this actually sums it up. This is a catch. But I wanted to add to that. We have the similar situation in Austria, and the problem is that the bioenergy and the forest owners sector, they argue that if we cut the trees, even if we burn them, then we replace fossil energy sources, which doesn't make any sense because CO2 is CO2. So from the point of view of the climate, it's making no difference between a biogenic CO2 source or a fossil CO2 source. But this narrative, to some people who do not think properly about that, is somehow convincing. They say, okay, replace oil by wood. because wood is green. Yeah. So there's a lots of lies and misinformation around. Yeah. And we have to counter that. And of course, we need to, the sink in Austria is gone, like in Sweden.
Oh, okay. Okay, Martin. Yeah, I think to build up volume and stand age is, I think, one of the key factors to restore the forest. So I think it's really helpful. And I think also we should keep in mind that all harvested cubic meters are not the same. There are many cubic meters harvested that doesn't really bring any income to the forest owner. And that is also a signal from my point of view. It's a signal from the society. It doesn't want this so much. Otherwise, the price would be higher. So I think we can actually reduce the harvest quite a lot and still get more or less the same amounts of money out of the forest. But here again, we have this the problem of the two different perspectives from the processing industry and from the forestry sector. And I think a general problem in this whole discussion is that we look at this as the same system, but actually it is two different systems. And I think
that's about the right price.
Exactly.
So production volume doesn't equal income.
No, not really at all.
Thank you. There is a question on the second, and then
I have a question about the role of scientists. I'm working as a scientist in the biological forest already for quite some years, and I was disappointed to see how I thought we had very convincing, there are very convincing arguments to stop logging in the biological forest, but somehow we were waved off quite quickly by economical reasons or political reasons. And what I'm wondering is about is what should be the role of scientists in guiding political decisions, or because it's also related to what we just mentioned, the role as forest as carbon storage. I think science can help to say what is true or what's not true.
It should be mandatory.
It should be mandatory, but somehow it doesn't work like that. I always feel that we are trying to find the arguments, but that you don't reach the upper levels.
We reach a point where I think it's a matter of life and death. And we do not have time that politicians and society are catching up with science. We have to bring science by force. That's a conversation that we should have.
Okay. Yes, I would like to say something about that, because we had this discussion also in Austria, and there is now an organization called the Austrian Biodiversity Council. It consists of scientists, and it's a council of scientists, and they also overlap with the Scientists for Future in Austria, and they are very active. So they join also street protests, they publish papers, they publish fact sheets, they try to translate scientific papers into something which is more popular and also more attractive and understandable by non-scientists. They do a lot of media work. They came up with a fact check on the nature restoration law and with a fact check on EUDR because of all these misleading and lieful claims around. So they proactively say that's not true, and this is the scientific facts. And I think that's a role which would be extremely helpful. So if
science revolution.
No, actually join forces. We need to join forces, and there are different roles and niches and capacities and resources, and science is very, very much important. Also because there's lots of players out there, especially in those bubbles which are full of hate and right-wing ideas, etc. They say we don't trust scientists because they are part of the conspiracy. And this is very dangerous, because then there is no truth left. And this is a very dangerous development.
But there's a friction there. Not as a scientist, I need to just publish papers. Not that's and actually, I also feel that the translation of the scientific work to easier to understand messages, that's the part we're not.
If I may say a very short thing, we made focus groups, like research study on who should be speaking to the society specifically about nature restoration law. When I am saying the same thing that you are saying, people don't believe me as much as you are saying it as a scientist. So not only publishing papers, but being the messenger to the society is a very important thing that few scientists unfortunately do. I know why. Grants, research, things you don't have time. But I encourage very much to speak up also, not only publish.
Okay, I have 4 more raised hands. First in the second row, yes, Nisha.
Thank you so much.
And then Eva, and then in the back, and then you.
So I'm a social scientist. So I try to translate scientists like you and probably pretend to talk to you. So our roles are slightly different from scientists. But I wanted to ask this question because I'm from India, and in India, forests are managed for survival rather than leisure. And now I live in Norway, where forests, of course, are managed for timber, as we're talking about, and I'm getting interested in that. But it's also been largely managed for recreation and leisure and well-being, because the constitution says there is right to roam. And what that is leading to is clearance of huge tracts of forest and, this construction of gravel paths and large-scale land use change. But then there is also interest of other NGOs that promote well-being. There are also these schemes where integration of immigrants depends on them going and spending time in forests, because it's cultural in Europe, which probably is not so from where I come from. So my question is, how do you then reconcile the interest of different groups, which is a very political question? And also, can we talk about trees that are outside forests and managing those as well? So
Who wants to answer? Yes, Matthias?
I do some stuff about fostering tourism, and also to use tourism development as a protection shield for natural areas. And this only works if you don't attract mass tourism. So as soon as you build big roads, big hotels, big parking areas, whatever, and make access easy, then you have the areas filled all over the place with too many tourists. Yeah, if you limit that, to those who actually know how to behave, and who have a closer relation to the natural stand, then damage will be overseeable. This is something you can study in some of the national parks, which are managed well, where you channel the influx of tourists and you have kind of integration protection, but also economical development in the area because of the influx of tourists. But you have to limit that, otherwise it will be turned into the opposite.
Okay. Thank you. I think there was a second question, trees outside forests, which is a little bit out of scope of this panel that deals with old-growth forests and primary forests.
Just one sentence.
Yeah.
Bologna has a lot of shady, small streets, which is great when it's hot. Many cities don't have that, and trees would help a lot.
Can I say something to this?
But very briefly, we have 3 more
Climate
questions.
change
5
is
minutes.
working in some regards, also in some positive ways. It's helping building up forest cover outside the official forest cover in a very fast manner on abandoned and degraded agriculture lands. We have about 2 million hectares of those in Romania only. There is plenty also in Spain and Portugal and elsewhere. And awkwardly, the European Union is funding destroying this forest by giving subsidies to the farmers to just keep it clean. So it's a good thing and a bad thing, but I think these trees are very important because this is exactly Mother Nature showing us how she's trying to overcome the bad things we're doing. And I think we should just let her happen.
Succession.
And succession and learn from it.
Yeah.
Which species are coming? How?
3 questions and 3 minutes. Eva, and really brief answer.
University, Sweden. I grew up in Poland and studied forestry in Poland. So one question was, we studied alternative methods of cutting forests, not just clear cutting. Over 30 years ago, in many countries, Poland, Germany, they have been used for probably 50 years or longer. So it's taking a long time to come to Sweden. Sweden is 97% still clear cutting. But there are good things that there is discussion now about alternatives to clear cutting. SLU is teaching continuous cover forestry classes. But recently we visited with students Swedish church forest. They are trying to bring new methods. They are not always successful, like gap cutting. So, I was approached by a colleague who owns a forest, but she wants to use different type of, she is a scientist, she inherited forest, different type of harvesting. And her question, how I find, I don't know what's the English term, virkesköpare, who knows how to do different methods than just like a contractor who buys wood, who promotes different methods than clear cutting. And the same, they talk about capacity, we need capacity building, how to do it, how to install the new method and who people can contact.
Yeah, I think
Martin, on this, please.
Yeah, we obviously lacking this kind of entrepreneurs. I mean, we have some good examples, and I'm working with some of them, and we got requests for buying timber or doing work far out of their geographical area. So there is an obvious lack of those. And I hope that will increase the interest for other entrepreneurs to go into this sector, because this far they have been surprisingly low interest for this far.
Thank you, Martin. Maybe more food for dialogue between the two of you.
And I just wanted to advertise Natural Forest Academy, Germany. They have a lot of applications. They do trainings. Yes.
Yeah, we also do this.
Lübeck is a best practice model. Yes.
5,500 hectares.
And the gentleman at the very back, last question.
From Latvia, working in a nature conservation agency, and actually there is tons of points that would like to add, but as it's limited in time, I will just ask one question from those. So we are speaking about protecting primary and overall forests, but what about gap between managed forests and overall forests? As in Latvia, in this year, there was a curve where non-government associations like Ornithology Association actually judged the government that it allowed a rule that allowed to cut trees in the forest, which basically which happens that the gap goes wider. Fortunately for Latvia, we managed to win that court and the rule was cancelled. But how is the gap in your countries and how to fight with this increase?
Well, you have a very big problem in Latvia, and we have a common problem. It's called IKEA, who has become the largest private forest owner in both countries. They have 100,000 hectares of forest in Latvia, and they're doing clear cuts. We just broke the ice and started to have a conversation just to tell you where I expect to be in a few years. And I'm coming actually right now from the meeting with IKEA in Netherlands, because they have some offices in Stockholm and some in Netherlands. I made it very clear for them, it's game over with all practices. They're not practicing what they preach, and what they preach is less than what they should do. And we're reopening this. So we have to basically join forces if you have interest, because we have a common thread. And it's not just IKEA, it's the whole philosophy of fast furniture and clear cuts that has been brought to your country. 100,000 hectares is a lot of forest for a single owner. And they're gonna do everything they can to change the legislation there to make their philosophy happen. So please, let's be in touch.
Yeah, so please maybe directly afterwards,
Yes.
you can have a chat. Well, time's over. Thanks to the audience, also to my panelists here. It was really great to have you. And what we will do in the future is, in the near future, we will have a beer tonight. Or several of them, really cold beers. And then also try to make sense of what we have been discussing in the last weeks and also today.
Pizza.
And pizza, yes. And maybe we can produce something, something visible. Okay, so thanks a lot. See you on the conference.
Thanks to you for organizing and moderating us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Not to get all the praises, you know, like we just came and spoke like.
I forgot to say about the peace park.
Yeah.
But for that, we need the endorsement from scientists mostly. So perhaps we can talk it because it's one positive project.
Well, let's talk about it over the pizza tonight.
Yes.
And I think we really should write down or maybe different pieces, like or something more and so on.